I always thought the cruelest things were said in whispers, but she said it into a microphone. We've decided to keep the wedding circle very tight. No kids, and no mothers-in-law who think everything is about them. The room went quiet, like the air had been vacuumed straight out of the walls. Ashley stood center stage, champagne in hand. That glittery, rehearsed smile stretched across her face. She didn't look in my direction, not directly, but everyone else did. Some with confusion, some with curiosity, one with an audible chuckle. And Daniel? My son, the one I raised alone since he was 6, stared down into his untouched plate like maybe the potatoes would rescue him from this moment. I felt the breath catch behind my ribs. Not enough to gasp, just enough to bruise. I was holding a small gift box I'd wrapped myself. Inside was the linen handkerchief from my wedding day, hand-stitched with my initials. I'd always meant to pass it on to my future daughter-in-law. Ashley knew that. She'd seen the box. I handed it to her just minutes before she took the mic. She took it, thanked me sweetly, even gave me a little kiss on the cheek in front of everyone. And now here we were, 5 minutes later, and I was being exiled, packaged as a punchline. I stood there, frozen, a silent prop in someone else's script. The clinking of glasses resumed slowly. One of Ashley's bridesmaids muttered something like, "Good for her." Another smirked and toasted. I turned to Daniel, my son, my only child, and for a second he met my gaze, and then he looked away. I didn't say a word. I nodded slightly, turned on my heel, and walked toward the exit with the poise of someone who had learned over years of sacrifice how to hold pain without spilling it in public. No one stopped me. No one followed. Outside, the late afternoon sun was golden and bitter. I walked past the valet, heels clicking against concrete, the box still clutched in my hand. I didn't cry until I reached my car. Even then, it was a quiet cry, the kind where tears don't fall. They just stay trapped behind your lashes, burning. This wasn't just a slap in the face. It was a removal, an erasure, a clear message. You are not wanted here. Not as a mother, not as family, not even as a guest. And yet, hours before, Ashley had posted a photo with me online, captioned, "Can't wait to become part of this beautiful family." I sat in the car long enough for the shadows to change direction. A part of me wondered if this was the price for raising a son to be polite, to not make waves, to think silence was safer than conflict. But that night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake with every ache, every insult Ashley had ever cloaked in honey. From, "Wow, that's a bold lipstick at your age," to, "Maybe we should host holidays now, give you a break, since you're alone." It was always there, buried, sugar-coated, and now it had rotted all the way through. The next morning, at 7:12 a.m., I heard knocking. I opened the door in my robe, expecting the neighbor, maybe a delivery. It was Daniel, hair disheveled, tie loosened, eyes swollen with regret that hadn't yet turned to language. He looked at me for a long time. Then he whispered, "Mom, I think I lost everything. Can I come in?" He stood in my doorway, wringing his hands like a boy about to confess breaking a window. But this wasn't about glass. This was about something far more fragile, us. And maybe it was cruel of me, but in that moment, I didn't invite him in. I stepped aside and let him walk past. Then I closed the door gently behind us, not slamming, just final. He sat at the kitchen table, the same table I bought secondhand when he was 5, when I couldn't afford anything else. His shoulders slumped forward, fingertips pressed together like he was praying. Maybe he was. I didn't say much. Instead, I poured him coffee. The old-fashioned way, percolator, cream on the side, 2 sugars. The way he used to beg for when he was 12 and wanted to feel grown up. And for a while, that's all we did. He sipped. I stirred. The quiet hummed between us like an old refrigerator. Constant, a little cold, but alive. Maybe I should have spoken first. But my mind had already wandered somewhere else. Somewhere far behind us. To a time when I used to believe that love was loud. That sacrifice came with parades or applause or, at the very least, acknowledgement. But I learned that real sacrifice is silent. I learned it the first time I took a second job cleaning classrooms after hours. Daniel was only 7, and he'd fall asleep in the teacher's lounge on a cot the janitor lent me. I remember watching his tiny chest rise and fall while I scrubbed glue off desks. Back then, my husband had already been sick. Heart failure, the slow kind, the kind that steals your future one pill bottle at a time. I buried him before Daniel turned 9. We didn't even have money for the headstone right away. I told Daniel we'd get it next spring, and in the meantime we visited an empty patch of grass and talked to the air. I never remarried. Part of me didn't have the energy. The other part didn't want to bring anyone else into the life I was building, for him. I took jobs most people wouldn't. Hotel laundry, school bus monitor. One summer I cleaned boats at the lake until my knuckles cracked and bled, and every dollar went to Daniel, every shoe, every doctor visit, every book fair and band trip. When his high school announced a 2-week college prep program, I sold my engagement ring to cover it. He never knew. He just came home one day and said, "Mom, it was amazing. I really think I could get into state." And I smiled like it didn't cost me anything but time. He got in. Full ride for the first year, but housing wasn't covered, so I picked up overnight shifts at the grocery store. I slept on buses and in the break room. I learned how to walk with a limp so I could hide a sprained ankle and keep my shifts. I still remember our phone calls. Late at night he'd say, "You're the reason I can do this." And I'd reply, "Just don't forget where you came from." He promised he wouldn't. He promised more than once, but people forget. Sometimes gently, sometimes deliberately. The forgetting started with Ashley. I don't blame her for loving my son, but I do blame her for wanting to love him away from everything that made him. At first, it was little things. They skipped Thanksgiving one year, said they were traveling. Christmas, they sent a gift card. Then birthdays got awkward. Ashley would message me something sugary like, "Just letting you know we'll celebrate next weekend with our crew. Hope you're well?" Still, I held on. To hope, to memory, to the idea that motherhood was the kind of love that always got returned, eventually. When Daniel said they were buying a house, he asked if I could co-sign. He said it was temporary, just to get through underwriting. He didn't know my name was still on the old home equity account. He didn't realize the sacrifice I made 20 years ago still had strings attached. I signed, because mothers do, and because he was my son. After that, they stopped asking. They assumed I'd watch Leo, the boy Ashley brought into the marriage from a previous relationship. Assumed I'd keep holidays flexible. Assumed I'd be okay watching from the sidelines. But even then, I told myself, he's still my boy. He'll come back. That belief kept me warm on so many cold nights. Until Ashley said what she said, into a microphone, in front of people who didn't even know my last name. And now, here he was, at my table, older, smaller. He looked at me finally, eyes rimmed red, and whispered, "She wants me to cut you out completely, legally. She said you're toxic, controlling, that you're dead weight." I let his words settle like dust on my soul. And then I said, "Do you think that's true?" He shook his head fast, like he could undo the damage if he denied it quickly enough. But I didn't need him to deny it. I just needed to know if he remembered. Anything. The boats, the ring, the dinners eaten in silence so he could have seconds. His eyes filled again, and for the first time in what felt like years, he said, "I remember, Mom. I remember everything. But the thing about remembering, it only matters if you act on it." He remembered. He said the words, "I remember everything." But remembering alone never saved anyone. For a while, Daniel came around more often after that morning. Not daily, but enough. He'd stop by on Sunday afternoons with Leo in tow. Sometimes he'd offer to mow the lawn. Once he brought bagels and sat with me for hours, just talking. I wanted to believe it was a new beginning, but it wasn't. It was a holding pattern, just enough to ease his guilt, not enough to change the way things were. Ashley still never came. She'd text me through Daniel's phone, short and syrupy. "Thanks for watching, Leo. You're such a gem. We'll take you to brunch soon. So busy lately. XOXO." Brunch never happened. What did happen was quiet, gradual, cruel in its smallness. It started when I began finding Leo's things in boxes by the door, diapers, clothes, his tablet, a tiny toothbrush. At first I thought it was convenience, so they didn't have to pack a bag every time. But then one Friday afternoon, Daniel called and said, "Hey Mom, Ash has a work trip, and I've got a weekend conference. We were hoping Leo could just stay with you through Monday." I paused. "Of course," I said, because I always did. But Monday came, and no one showed. Tuesday, I called. No answer. Wednesday, a text from Ashley. "Daniel's car broke down, and I'm still in Dallas. You don't mind a few more days, right?" No apology. No follow-up. Just an expectation. I took care of Leo like he was mine, made his oatmeal with cinnamon the way he liked, read Where the Wild Things Are 3 times before bed, sat on the floor playing blocks with stiff knees and a smile. But on Thursday evening, after bath time, he looked up at me and asked, "Grandma, why does Mommy say you're a faker?" I blinked. "A faker?" He nodded solemnly. "She said you only pretend to be nice because you want Daddy's money." My breath caught. The room was warm and cozy, and yet I felt cold all over. Leo was 5, and already repeating the poison. I tucked him into bed, kissed his forehead, then walked into the kitchen and sat at the table, lights off. It was there, sitting in the quiet, staring at my own hands, that I realized this was never going to get better, because I wasn't part of their family. I was their fallback plan, their free childcare, their ghost of obligation. Still, I held on a little longer, because that's what mothers do. Until the night of Leo's school recital. He had a small part, a bumblebee in a springtime play. I helped him practice his line every evening that week. "When the flowers bloom, I buzz and zoom." I bought him a little felt headband with yellow antennas. I sewed black stripes onto a yellow t-shirt. Ashley had the nerve to tell me the recital was parents only, due to space. But something felt off. So I called the school, spoke to the secretary, and of course, grandparents were allowed. I went, sat in the back row, wore my nice slacks, brought flowers wrapped in soft tissue paper. Leo spotted me the moment he stepped on stage. His face lit up. He waved wildly. After the play, I waited near the door. Ashley saw me first. She walked up with that same honey smile she used at the rehearsal dinner, so sweet it stung. "Hi," she chirped. "Oh gosh, I didn't think you'd be able to make it." I looked her in the eye. "I called the school. They said grandparents were welcome." She blinked, then laughed. "Well, I guess I misunderstood. Silly me." And then, just under her breath, too quiet for the teacher but loud enough for me, she hissed, "This is why no one invites you. You don't know how to stay gone." I didn't answer. I didn't react. But I saw Daniel across the room. He was chatting with another dad, not looking this way. Later that week, Leo didn't come over. Or the week after that. And when I texted Daniel to check in, I got one line back. "Ashley thinks it's best we set some boundaries for now." Boundaries. That word. That cold, clinical word people use when they don't have the courage to say, "You're no longer wanted." Weeks passed, then months. One Sunday, I showed up with a small Easter basket I made for Leo, some candy, a storybook, a stuffed bunny. I rang the doorbell. Ashley answered. She stepped outside, pulled the door halfway closed behind her, and said, again, all syrup and ice, "Leo's really busy with school stuff. Thanks for the basket, though." I handed it to her. She took it with 2 fingers like it might be sticky. And then she smiled and added, "You don't have to keep doing this, you know. It's not your job." I looked at her for a long time. Long enough to see the pride in her eyes, the triumph. And then she said it. "Daniel won't say it, but I will. We've outgrown you." That was it. No yelling. No slamming doors. I turned, walked back to my car, sat in silence. And that night, for the first time, I didn't cry. I stared at the ceiling and felt empty, like a drawer you've emptied out, only to realize you were the one who filled it in the first place. They didn't take something from me. They just stopped pretending. And in that space, quiet, bitter, unadorned, I finally heard the voice I'd buried for years. It whispered, "Enough." I didn't scream. I didn't slam doors or threaten lawsuits. I just got up early the next morning, poured myself a quiet cup of coffee, and opened the small fireproof box I'd kept under my bed for years. The box that held every paper they thought I was too old, too naive, or too sentimental to understand. It held receipts, land transfer titles, letters from George, my late husband, carefully signed in blue ink. And it held a will, his will. They thought I'd never use it. They thought grief would silence me. But grief, I've learned, makes you sharper. It peels off illusions like old wallpaper. The morning after the wedding, I wasn't allowed to attend. While my son collapsed crying on my porch, I was already dressed. I handed him tissues. I didn't ask why he came. Not yet. I just said, "We're going downtown. Bring your ID." He didn't even ask why. At the attorney's office, I slid the documents across the table. My hands were steady, my voice calm. The lawyer skimmed the papers and looked up at me with that brief flicker of respect men rarely offer women my age, unless there's a chess move they didn't see coming. "Ma'am, I have to say, this is airtight." I nodded. "I know." George had made me the sole legal owner of the house and the adjacent lot after his passing, something we never told our son out of fear it'd change how he treated me. He also added a clause. If I were ever forcibly removed or mistreated by family, the will would trigger a default clause transferring power of attorney to me, not our son. I had never intended to use it, but intent changes when someone treats you like a burden with no memory. We walked out of the office with more than just legal leverage. We walked out with clarity. That evening I asked Daniel, my son, to explain what had happened at the wedding. His voice cracked. After the ceremony, Ivy made a toast and thanked her new family, her parents, her friends, even her dog sitter. But not you. She didn't even mention you. Then she told me if I invited you to the dinner afterward, she'd leave the reception. So I didn't. I didn't know what to do. I listened. No yelling, no moral lecture, just silence that made him squirm in his tailored suit. "Do you remember," I said slowly, "when you were 8 and you brought me a broken mug you tried to glue back together with Elmer's?" And I said, "Thank you, honey. It's beautiful." Because it was? He blinked. That's what love is. Choosing not to notice the cracks when someone's trying their best. Ivy didn't even try. He looked like he'd been slapped, but it was truth, not cruelty. And he needed it. The next day, I called Ivy myself. Her tone was all sugar and vinegar. "Oh, hi, Mom. Daniel said you were feeling a bit left out. But you know, it was just a small venue." I let her finish. Every fake syllable. Then I asked her to come by the house. "There's something I'd like to give you," I said. She showed up in pearls and condescension. I handed her a letter. She opened it with a polished nail and an arched brow. "What is this?" My withdrawal of co-signature. Her lips curled. Of what? Of the house title Daniel thought was his. I signed it over to myself when George passed. He wanted to protect me. "You see, Ivy, you've spent months pushing me out of this family, but I never left. I just waited for the right moment." I could see her throat tighten under that string of pearls. "This house," I continued, "is not your marital home, it's mine, and I'm asking you to move out by the end of the month." She laughed, but it was thin. "Daniel won't let you do this." I handed her the next paper. "He already did." She stormed out, slamming the door so hard a picture fell off the hallway wall. I didn't even flinch. That night, Daniel sat quietly across from me, the way he used to when he was a boy, waiting for a verdict on whether I'd forgive him. I didn't speak right away. I just placed an old photo between us. It was him, age 9, baking banana bread with me, flour on his nose. "I lost that boy somewhere," I said softly. "I want him back." Tears welled up in his eyes. "I want to be him again, too." I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I just nodded. It was a start. And then came the church. The pastor, an old friend of mine, asked if I'd be willing to speak at a Sunday luncheon, Mother's Day, no less. Ivy would be there. So would her entire social circle. I almost said no. But then I thought, No raised voice could ever be louder than quiet dignity in a room full of liars. I said yes. I wore navy. Simple, respectful. As I took the mic, I saw Ivy's face falter. I didn't name names. I didn't air dirty laundry. I simply told the story of a woman who once raised a boy alone, who worked 2 jobs, who cooked dinners and checked homework and fixed broken dreams with tape and prayer, who never asked for thanks, just a seat at the table. And sometimes, I said, that seat disappears. Sometimes love is edited out of the final guest list. A pause. But love, real love, doesn't vanish. It doesn't throw away people like their storage boxes after Christmas. It stays. It remembers. And one day, it returns. I left the podium. The silence behind me was louder than applause. Later that day, Daniel placed his hand over mine as we sat on the porch. "She won't come back here," he said. "She's furious." I looked out at the trees. "That's her choice." He hesitated. "What about me?" I didn't answer right away. I let the wind speak first. Then I said, "That's up to you. I've set my boundaries. Whether you stay within them is your decision." He nodded. And for the first time in years, I saw in his eyes not the little boy who needed me, but the man who finally saw me. When you've been silent long enough, people mistake your quiet for weakness. But silence is often just the sound of the storm gathering. That morning, when Charles showed up at my door, face puffy, hair messy, suit wrinkled from a night on someone else's couch, I didn't have to say a word, not right away. I just opened the door and stepped aside. He walked in like a man whose world had crumbled overnight. And truthfully, it had. He sank into the old armchair, the same one he used to crawl onto when he was 6, wrapped in a fleece blanket, asking me to turn the thunder off. But there was no blanket now, no comfort in my arms, only cold daylight and consequences. "I didn't know, Mom," he said. "I swear." I didn't know what Ashley did until after. She told me it was handled, that you agreed not to come. I stood by the window, letting the sun warm the side of my face. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes people confess more than they intend. "She told the guests you were sick, that you'd refuse to be part of the ceremony," he continued, voice cracking. "When Dad's picture didn't show up at the altar, when your name wasn't even on the program, that's when I knew something was off." I finally turned, and I looked him in the eye. "Did you ask?" I said. "Or did you just let her take over like always?" He opened his mouth, closed it. And that silence, that tiny, flinching silence, was all the answer I needed. Because see, this wasn't just about a wedding. It was about years of letting Ashley redraw the boundaries of what family meant. Years of watching him get quieter, smaller, around her. Of watching him call less, visit less, and each time explaining it away like it was normal. She didn't like drama. She didn't like old-fashioned guilt trips. She didn't like interference. But what she liked, or rather disliked, had slowly become law. And now that law had left him standing alone in his tux, bride gone, ring abandoned on a dinner plate, and 24 guests whispering about the woman who never showed up to say her vows. "I lost her," he said, head in his hands. "She left this morning, packed up everything, said I'm just like my mother, like that was the worst thing someone could be." And somehow, that hurt less than hearing the last part. She took my laptop, my phone. She locked the home office, the accounts. He paused, realizing something. But she couldn't touch the house, could she? Now he looked up. "Because it's in your name." I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. I didn't say, "I told you so." Instead, I walked over to the drawer, opened it, and took out a single envelope. The one I'd sealed months ago, long before the wedding invitations went out, long before the first cruel comment from Ashley landed like a slap behind my back. I handed it to him. He stared at it. "What's this?" "My lawyer's letter," I said softly. the same one I sent yesterday. I had it ready, just in case. He opened it with trembling hands. Inside was the legal transfer of the house deed, not to Ashley, not even to him, but to my granddaughter, little Caroline, just 5 years old, held in trust, with 2 trustees, my lawyer and me. His eyes scanned the paper once, twice, then again. Then he just sat back, stunned. "She can't touch it," I said. "She can't sell it. She can't leverage it. She can't move a dollar without both trustee signatures." "But you gave up the house?" I shook my head. "I gave it forward." He broke then. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet tears, like someone who realized they'd been drowning in slow motion for years. "Why?" he whispered. "Because someone in this family still deserves a place to come home to," I said, "even if it skips a generation." Word spread fast. Weddings are one thing. Scandals, far tastier. People who hadn't called me in years started reaching out, not to console me. No, that would require humility, but to sniff around the truth. Was it true that Ashley stormed out? Was it true that the house was no longer in their hands? And what was this about a little girl owning it all? At church the following Sunday, Mrs. Jenkins leaned in close and whispered, "You didn't raise a fool, Mary. You raised a woman with patience." And somehow, that felt more validating than anything else I'd heard in years. Meanwhile, Ashley's little empire began to unravel. She tried to claim emotional manipulation on social media, claimed I'd exploited family trauma to gain control of Charles. But when the wedding photographer leaked pictures showing her pulling Caroline away from me at the bridal rehearsal, visibly angry, visibly loud, the court of public opinion turned fast. Charles, to his credit, didn't chase her. He stayed, apologized to me every day for a week, sat with Caroline at breakfast like he was learning to be a father all over again. One morning, as I was folding laundry, he came into the kitchen holding his daughter. "She asked if you could teach her how to make those lemon cookies again," he said, eyes glassy. "She still remembers." I nodded, blinking away my own tears. "We'll make a double batch." There was one moment, though, one that lingered. Ashley came back, briefly, not to apologize, but to bargain. She showed up on the front porch like a gust of wind in heels and designer sunglasses, clutching a bag that probably cost more than my monthly groceries. "I just want what's fair," she said, voice sweet but tight. I didn't open the screen door. I just looked at her. "You want fair?" She nodded, smug. I smiled gently. "I gave you everything," I said. "Time, space, respect. And you gave me silence, distance, humiliation." She blinked, caught off guard. "So now," I continued, "I'm giving you something else." Her eyebrows raised. "Freedom." Then I shut the door. And that was that. I've always believed that silence can be the loudest answer. And in the months after everything came crashing down, I let my silence speak volumes. I moved out of the house I once dreamed would be full of grandkids' laughter. I found a small one-bedroom cottage on the edge of town, tucked behind an old church and surrounded by a garden that looked like it had been waiting for someone with enough patience to love it back to life. And I did. Every morning I'd wake up early, pull on my gloves, and tend to the roots and roses like they were my second chance. The soil was firm but forgiving, unlike people, unlike family. One afternoon, while I was clipping back a stubborn patch of thorny vines, a little voice called over the fence. "Hi, lady?" A boy, no older than 7, with scruffy hair and a runny nose, grinned at me through the slats. His name was Eli. His grandma had passed the year before, and he told me, very seriously, that my tomatoes smelled like her hugs. That boy started coming by every week, at first just for the tomatoes, but then for the stories. I'd read to him on a little bench near the hydrangeas, and soon his sister joined us. Then their mom brought cookies. And somehow I wasn't invisible anymore. It's strange. After so much betrayal, it wasn't justice that healed me. It was the quiet acts of being seen again, of being useful in ways that didn't require sacrificing myself. I started volunteering at the local library, just 2 afternoons a week, reading to children, shelving books, Sometimes teaching women my age how to use email so they could finally see pictures of their grandbabies without waiting for a visit that never came. There was peace in that. A quiet rhythm. No one expected me to give more than I had. No one called me too much or not enough. And then, one evening, after a reading group had finished their warm cider, a woman about my age leaned in and whispered, "I've watched all this happen to you, you know. My daughter treats me the same. I haven't seen my grandkids in 6 months." I reached out and held her hand. Not because I had a solution, but because I understood. Sometimes that's more powerful than advice. To every mother, grandmother, aunt, or caregiver listening right now, let me say this directly. You are not disposable. You are not a burden. And if someone has tried to make you feel otherwise, please believe me when I say that their blindness is not your reflection. You don't have to set yourself on fire to keep everyone else warm. Sometimes the strongest love you can give is the love you give to yourself when everyone else has walked away. If you've ever been shut out of a wedding, a decision, a life you helped build, only to be handed silence in return, please know, you still matter. You matter deeply. And to those of you who are watching this video with tears in your eyes because your story looks a little too much like mine, please share it. Not for me, but for the others out there still sitting in that quiet room, wondering what they did to deserve being forgotten. Leave a comment. Say, "That was me," or "Brahme, she just told my story." Because someone might scroll down, see your words, and realize for the first time that they're not alone either. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, someone who's doubting their worth because of the cruelty of others, send them this video. Let this be their mirror, and if this space, this channel, this voice, has given you even a fraction of comfort, I hope you'll consider staying, subscribing, leaving your story behind so others can find it too. Because the truth is, stories save us, sometimes even more than justice, and your story, just like mine, still matters.